All right, you guys. Well, welcome to Parent Pause. We are so glad that you are here and joining us on Cinco de Mayo and are looking forward to having some time with you this evening to talk about routines and rituals and jump into some Q&A. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about Parent Pause in case this is your first time joining us. My name is Rachel Hodges and I am the director of Karis Kids, which is our team of counselors who work with children and teens and their families at Karis House Community Counseling Center, which is a ministry of the Journey Church. And so as we have just been walking through this season of the last couple of months with everything happening in our country, we have just been thinking about parents and caregivers and what it's like to walk with our kids through this season. And as we started being approached about what it looked like to provide intentional care for parents, what we loved the idea of was just creating space for parents to gather and to pause. We know that more so than ever, parents are being invited to put on a lot of hats and do a lot of caregiving. And so our hope is that as you join us for these parent pauses, that it really would be that it would be a pause for you, whatever that might look like. I know for some of us, that's grabbing something to drink and a blanket and getting snuggled up on a couch. For others of us, it might be popping in our earbuds and going for a walk around the block. But we just invite you, whatever that feels like for you, to engage with that right now as we meet and to just slow down with us. So a little bit about me personally. I work at Karis House and I attend the Journey Metro East, and I am a licensed clinical social worker who loves to get to do this work with kiddos and families. So we are glad that you are here. Wanted to let you know that Nahana Stagner, who is the director of Journey Kids at Metro East, is joining us tonight. She is our virtual host, which means that if you are watching us on YouTube right now and you're live with us, there is a chat option and a chat bar, and she is there to welcome you and to help grab your questions. So as we're talking tonight, if you have questions about the content we're sharing or other things that you're walking through right now, please feel free to drop those questions below. And so, coming away from tonight, if other questions come up that you would like us to address in a future Parent Pause, you can go ahead and email it to parentpause@thejourney.org. So tonight, as we get going, Jill is going to be talking a lot about routines and rituals and really building on what we talked about last time with felt safety. So if you've not been able to join us before, I just want to let you know that we have a couple of our previous Parent Pauses recorded and available as a resource for you. They're accessible on the Journey website and on Karis House's Facebook page. You can just go to those links and learn more about what we talked about in the first few weeks, which has been topics like felt safety, connection, play, and regulation. So that is there for you. With that being said, I want to invite us all to actually pause together and take a deep breath. Let's do another one. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Jill Oberle, and she's going to take it from here. Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel. Yes, I'm Jill Oberle. I am also a counselor on staff at Karis House and get to work on the Karis Kids team with Rachel. And so, tonight we are going to be talking a little bit about the concepts of routines and of rituals. So last Parent Pause, about 2 weeks ago, Rachel introduced the idea of felt safety. And she really explained that felt safety is when we cultivate an environment through our emotions and through our behaviors that promote safety for our children. And felt safety is really more than just our kids cognitively knowing that they're safe. But it's them actually experiencing and feeling safety with us. So it's very different when a person tells you you're safe or tells you not to be afraid, but it's another experience when they actually come beside you and maybe put their arm around you or sing a comforting song with you, right? So we really want to talk about how do we create that felt experienced safety with our kids. Because sometimes as adults, right, our natural instinct is to simply use our language or our words to tell our children that they're safe. Because our brains are fully developed in a lot of ways. In those moments, we can logically know why our child is safe. But oftentimes that's just not going to land with our kiddos. And that can be for a number of reasons. They might just simply not have the developmental capacity to understand what we're communicating through our words. And also, they might be in a current state of fear. And what we know about our brains when we are experiencing heightened states of fear is that those logical, linguistic parts of our brain just aren't able to function. So felt safety really implies that our child is feeling safety by experiencing it with us through eye contact, through safe touch, through a gentle tone of voice, through meeting their basic needs and regulating, like we talked about in a previous parent pause. And Rachel said this last time as she introduced felt safety, but it feels worth repeating again, that you might be saying like, wait a second, these days actually don't feel very safe. That my child and our family is facing something that we're not really sure if we're going to be okay. And so that feeling, so focusing on felt safety just feels counterintuitive when our actual safety and well-being might actually be at risk. And we just want to acknowledge that and say, yes, that is real. And I think it's a very hard thing we as parents are contending with in this season. But we would also say what we know is that we were created to operate from a place of complete safety, right? That was God's intention for us in the garden. And so we want to still try to help cultivate that safety as much as we are able to in this season. Because what we know is that feeling of felt safety is really going to lead to optimal health and development for our kids. So last week, Rachel shared that one way we can cultivate felt safety with our kiddos is through play. And so tonight, I want to highlight another way that we can do that is through routines and rituals. So our young kids, and sometimes even our older kids too, they actually struggle a bit with a lack of organization. And we might see that displayed through some difficult or hard behaviors. And this could be for a number of reasons. One, it could be your child's just development, where they are developmentally and what their capacities are. It could also be your child's temperament, just how they're wired is not to be particularly organized. It could even be circumstantial, right? That given just the current climate of the world, the fear and the anxiety that our kiddos are having to experience, their capacity to organize themselves or to structure themselves just might be a bit lower in this season. And if we think about it, in this season of life, most of the things that really organized or structured our kiddos' days is really gone. So the bus ride to school, the structure that the classroom teacher provided for them. I know for my son, a big one is that we would go to the Y most mornings of the week together, and that's gone. That structure or that part of our day is no longer there. And so because of that, the fact that all of these things that organize and structure our kids' days have kind of gone away in many ways, our kiddos can really feel quite chaotic and quite disorganized. And so what we want to try to do as parents and caregivers is to provide repeated daily routines that are going to make life feel a bit more predictable and give our kiddos this feeling of inner security or that feeling of felt safety that we talked about earlier. So daily repeated routines can be things as simple as waking up at the same time each day or having regular meal times or having regular times where we're moving our body throughout the day through exercise or activity, even a normal bedtime. So when we're talking about routines, though, I'm not referring to the idea that every minute of your day needs to be planned. That just feels kind of unrealistic. But really, it's this feeling of being organized internally, because there's a rhythm to the day. There's an order to things. There's this understanding of I know how the day is going to flow. So for some of you, you might be thinking like, wait, we actually have a pretty decent routine. And so I want you to maybe take note, just pause in this moment to think about what are the things that are structuring your day. And I want you to just maybe actually physically write a note, just take a mental note, and then think about how do I make sure that I keep those things consistent and a priority in the days moving forward? Because that's actually going to be really helpful for your kiddos. And something to also keep in mind about routines is that um, routines require consistency, but consistent does not mean being rigid. So routines are not about rigid rules. We really have to approach parenting in this season with a lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptability, knowing that our child's capacity for certain tasks and things are going to be a bit lower. So we want to have quite a bit of flexibility in how we're structuring our routines. So here are just some personal ways that my own family has found a bit of a rhythm and routine in this season of life. I have a kiddo who is 3, so we are transitioning kind of from toddlerhood into preschool years. And at this stage of his development, one of the main things I'm most concerned about is his ability to regulate and the fact that I need to help physically regulate him in a lot of ways. So honestly, right now, our days are mostly structured around sleeping and eating. So when he wakes up in the morning, one of the first routines that we do is we eat breakfast within 30 minutes usually of when he wakes up. And then the next moment the next structured moment in our day is a snack time mid-morning, and then lunch, and then his afternoon nap, and then our bedtime routine. What happens between those moments can oftentimes change day to day, but those are things that just help my kiddo kind of understand the organization of the day, understand what the expectations are. And I think it helps him to just feel a bit more regulated and feels that felt safety. So Rachel, I'm curious to check in with you. What are ways that your family is prioritizing routines and structure in this season?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jill. And it's something that I love to think about. Yeah, those of my friends know that that's something I love to think about and ask them, how are you doing this? And what is this looking like in your world? So in our home, we have 3 children. My oldest is 7, and then we have a 4.5-year-old and then a 18-month-old. So we are kind of across the stretch of early childhood right now. We have toddler. And so for her routine, it honestly looks a lot like what you just shared about yours at your house, as far as morning nap, her morning wake up, when she wakes up, we're usually doing her first cup of milk and then quickly transitioning into breakfast. And for her specifically, it looks different because she's little. So it is very much structured around eating and sleeping and things like that. What looks different for my older kiddos, for my 4.5-year-old and 7-year-old, is they don't have nap times the same way anymore. But what we found at our house that we really still need to protect is a structured amount of quiet time, where there is just a known part of our day that is all for us, backs up to our lunchtime, where we're all slowing down as a family. So kind of whoever's home while our toddler, I want to call her my baby, while my baby goes down for her nap, the boys are usually set up to play in what we call our den, upstairs. And that's just our routine. They're able to, for the most part, manage being up there and do quiet play. So they either do it together there, or every once in a while, if it feels like it's a better fit, one of them might be in there playing and the other one might be looking at books in their bed or something like that. But that's a pretty regular part of our day. As well as for them, we still do morning snack and then an afternoon snack. And we like to try at about 4:30 or 5, kind of pause and all come together at the end of the day too. And sometimes that looks like us sitting on our front porch for a snack. Other times it looks like us going for a walk around the block. But pretty regularly, we're kind of gathering again at the end of the day before we start making dinner, and having a little bit of time to connect and play before we jump into dinner and bedtime.
Sweet. That's great.
Mhm.
Yeah. So hopefully that, uh, yeah, hopefully that is helpful as you all are thinking through just kind of the routines for your day and how that's going to be helping your child experience that felt safety. Another way that our kiddos can feel felt safety from us is through what we call rituals. And rituals are actually different from routines, because the goal of routines is really continuity, predictability, kind of this sense of internal organization, while the goals of rituals are connection and relationship. So if we kind of think back to the engine plate that I shared in our first parent pause, and we're thinking about regulation, routines are really going to help bring us back into the green and regulate us in in terms of like our physical needs. So structuring our meal times, our sleep patterns, when we're moving our body, all that good stuff. Whereas rituals are really going to be regulating our relational needs, that I need to feel connected to other people in this season, that I need to feel and express love with others. But both of them are really important in experiencing that felt safety. So rituals are really all about these moments where we are connected, where we are delighting in being fully present with our child. Kind of when all else stops around us and we are able to reconnect with one another during the day. So if we think of kind of, if we zoom out a little bit and we think about rituals of our culture, things that come top of mind are things like holidays and traditions. So sitting around the Thanksgiving table, right? We all stop in order to share a meal together. It's this ritual we do once a year where we are connecting with our family and friends and loved ones, or even singing happy birthday and blowing out birthday candles, right? It's these small moments where we do the same tradition again and again, to kind of mark connectedness and love towards one another. And rituals can be really wonderful to help us with transitions during the day. So I even think about kind of the ritual of the cleanup song. I know in preschool years, that's something that many people use. And it's this moment where we are connecting even as our day is changing and transitioning through this song. We're both singing it together, we're delighting in it. So that kind of comes top of mind when we think big picture. But something that I wanted to introduce to you all, kind of a specific form of rituals that you can practically integrate into your day, is something that we call collecting. And collecting is really all about how do we draw our child near to us and engage with them, especially before and after separations. So you might be thinking like, wait a second, I'm not really separated much from my children during this season. We're all at home together for the most part. We're not saying goodbye as much, but I would add that there is one separation that has remained consistent prior to the pandemic, and that still remains true, and that's actually bedtime. Bedtime is one of, if not the biggest separation that our children experience from us during the day. And you might actually be noticing maybe your kiddo is struggling, especially at bedtime during this season. And so we want to think about what are potential bedtime rituals and even morning rituals. So how do we create rituals to bedtime for bedtime that are going to connect us before we separate? And then upon waking up, what are rituals that we want to do in order to connect with one another and welcome our child back into our presence? Um, so thinking about this, if you have a baby, right? A nightly ritual for you all might be rocking in a rocking chair and singing a lullaby. And then in the morning, you might scoop the baby up and unswaddle them and watch as their arms explode out of their swaddle, and maybe sing a little song or tickle their face or something, like there's all sorts of little things we do with babies that are kind of these rituals that help us reconnect with them. And then as I started to think about rituals for younger kids and then older kids, I immediately actually started thinking about my own dad. My dad was a master of creating rituals with us, his kids, and he created them when we were young. So then they actually just kind of progressed over the years as we grew into adolescence. So I'm thinking about a bedtime ritual we had was my dad would tuck me in when I was younger and he would say, I love you in different languages. So he would say it in German and then Spanish and then English. And after each phrase, I would repeat the phrase back to him. And it was something we did every single night. It was in the exact same order. I always repeated the phrase, and it was just this sweet connecting moment for the two of us. And it just felt so special. I felt so delighted in by my dad. And as a teenager, then what that looked like was he wasn't tucking me in anymore. But he would peek his head into my door, as I was studying or whatever. And as he was off to bed and he would do it, he would say the I love yous, and I would repeat it back. And it was just a sweet thing that we continued to do even as I got older. And then I think about him waking me up in the morning as a kiddo and then as a teenager too. He always had a special knock he would do on my door that was a certain rhythm and pattern. And then he would turn on a light and sing a song that he created, whatever he felt like that morning. But again, it was kind of this connecting, playful ritual that every day at those times in the day, I could count on the fact that my dad and I were going to connect like that. So Rachel, I'm curious, do you have any rituals with your kids or any rituals come to mind?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really sweet to think about and so sweet to hear about that. Yeah, those interactions with your dad. So sweet to think about the different languages, especially at night. That's so sweet. Yeah, so I would say there's a couple different ones I can think of. And so one is, especially in this season where we have a toddler in my house, I'm fortunate enough that oftentimes when we are getting up in the morning, my boys are early risers and she likes to sleep in a little bit. Sometimes that's because she can be a little bit of a party girl at night, but in general, she likes to sleep in and the boys are early risers. That actually is very similar to my husband and I. He's more of an early riser and I like to sleep in. So all that to say, he's usually the one getting up in the morning with the boys. And then LMA, my daughter, and I are usually coming down about an hour or so later, which has been lovely in this season. And so oftentimes when I'm coming down, it's the first time I'm seeing the boys. And so my question for them is always like, where's mama's hug? Or where's mama's good morning hug? And so I usually am the one asking that and initiating it, but it's sweet because now every once in a while they'll say, where's my mama hug? And that is often how we are connecting as we see each other for the first time in the morning. And it's not always necessarily like the first thing that happens when I come downstairs, because sometimes I need to grab a drink or something like that, but it's just something that's become a regular part of our mornings. And another sweet one that has unfolded, this is, about over the last 6 months or so, is with one of my sons. He was having some scary dreams. at night. And then as he thought about them, he didn't like the idea of having scary dreams. And so it's just something that we were talking about one night as he was laying down for bed. And we just started this little ritual, this pattern of words where I would talk him through his body was tired and his brain is tired. And so I'll say that and he'll say that. My body is tired and my brain is tired. And we just have this little 3 or 4 sentence thing back and forth where I say the first phrase and then he repeats it. And it always ends with, we talk about he might have happy dreams, he might have sad dreams, he might have silly dreams, he might have scary dreams. And I say that and he repeats it. And then we talk about how no matter what, God is with him and mommy and daddy are nearby and he is safe. And so that's a newer one. It's not something we've been doing since he was a baby, but in this season where that's been something he's been facing more, that's just helped him to feel calm and safe at night. So that's been really good for us in this season.
Sweet. I love that. Thanks for sharing those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I hope that kind of those explanations help you to understand just more ways that you can create that felt safety for your kiddos. If you are curious to learn more about rituals in particular, a book or a resource I'd love to point you to is this book called I Love You Rituals. It is by Becky Bailey. And it is just a great resource to tell you more about rituals. And it has a whole kind of database of songs and games and ways to integrate rituals into your everyday. So that is that. I think we will transition now to some Q&A time. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you have a question from last Parent Pause to answer.
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. Yeah, it's sweet to think about and important to think about. Rituals and routines. So now as we transition into some Q&As, I did want to take some time to answer such a good question that has come up a couple of different ways over our last few gatherings. So one time it was asked as, what are some best practices to help siblings, specifically a toddler and a preschool age kiddo, negotiate and get along without fighting and crying all the time? That is real. I have kiddos those ages, and that is familiar territory. And then a similar way that it was worded, or another question that came in about this sibling conflict is, how can I address fighting between siblings during free play? And I just want to say these are such good questions. And as I think about it, and as I think, we think about this idea of how do we navigate as parents and as caregivers these moments of conflict and disruption with our kids. I'm going to start kind of from a 1,000-foot view, and then we'll dive into some more practical strategies. I will say that what I'm going to talk about is more descriptive rather than prescriptive. Just want to remind you that a lot of what I get to talk about, especially in a setting like this, is more like these are some tenets for you to think about, but we also really want you to invite you to take this that we're sharing in light of what you know about your kids already. So that being said, when we're thinking about conflict, first, I really want us to invite us to think about conflict in and of itself, and what is it, and how do we make sense of it, and to really reflect yourself as a parent is, what is your tendency with conflict in general? When you think about the other relationships that you're in your life, maybe with your spouse or your friends or your kids, what is that like for you when that conflict starts to happen? We have all sorts of ways that we respond. Some of us love to jump in and can't wait to get into discussion, where others of us want to literally run the other direction and are not interested in sticking around. And a lot of that can really shape what it's like to be in the presence of our children when they start to get into conflict. I know for me specifically, sometimes noise can be a huge trigger. And so if the conflict is louder, then I pretty quickly can become dysregulated. And so I need to just be aware that that's something for me that's going to be triggering to be mindful of. So I really want to invite you to, as you're thinking about walking with your kids through conflict, just be aware of kind of what are you bringing to the table with conflict in general. I think another thing that's important to keep in mind as we're thinking about conflict between our kids is to just remind ourselves that conflict with people is part of being in relationship with one another. Deborah McNamara said it this way. She said, the only way to avoid sibling conflict is to only have one child. And I just think that that is so well said, right? Because we're bringing two people together who are different people, who have different thoughts and goals and emotions. And so there is going to inevitably be conflict because we have people wanting different things potentially at the same time. So I just think that that is so helpful for us to remember amidst figuring out what is our role in conflict and in guiding our kids through these moments. So when we think about it, I think some keys are, as we kind of try to zoom in a little bit more, is that in these opportunities, it can be easy because of all the things that we bring to conflict, feel like we need to shut it down and to make it stop, and that we need to potentially manage it or protect one child from another, or really kind of come in with our own agendas. And that is so easy to do. But as much as possible, we want to really shift our role to be not one of shutting down the conflict or managing it, but one of guiding our kiddos through the conflict. So we really want to settle into our role as a leader in that moment in our family. And so we want to lead our kiddos through this conflict, because the reality is as grown adults and as grown people, it is good and right and healthy to be able to engage with conflict and disagreement in a healthy way. And so these times when our kiddos are engaging in this is actually a really beautiful opportunity to help train them and help shape their response to this conflict. So as we assume leadership, there's a couple things I want to invite you to keep in mind. Is it is really our responsibility. So we want to take on that responsibility of helping our kiddos through this. Again, that means we're not doing it for them, but we do want to guide them through it. And I think in order to do that, kind of like we've already mentioned, is we really do have to be aware of what are our own triggers and are we regulated, right? In that moment, if it's possible for us to grab a deep breath and check in and maybe even name for ourselves, like, I'm really overwhelmed because it's loud, but this is normal for kids to have conflict. And sometimes we have to like stop the train of our brain there, right? Sometimes when our kids are in conflict, it can like send our parent brains to, what does this mean? Or always or never statements about ourselves or our children. And that's just real. That happens. So I don't want you to feel bad if that happens to you, but it's just so helpful to notice and to name it. And as much as possible in that moment, try to take a deep breath and be present to what's happening, and not allow our brains to go to some of the other places. So again, we want to check in with ourselves, take a deep breath. And then as we seek to guide, our role in that moment is really, how can I bring some calm to the chaos of what might be unfolding? So part of that is really like thinking, as you bring calm to a situation, let's actually assess where it's at. Because there are times when our response can, instead of bring calm to chaos, it can bring chaos to chaos, right? Where we come in maybe big with a bigger response than what is necessary, or with our own assumptions, and can kind of cause things to go off the track more. And I'm speaking as a mom. I have been there. I have done that. And so as much as possible, really, really want to bring calm to the chaos. And so part of that is assessing, okay, how big of a, like, let's listen in and notice, is this a verbal disagreement where you can hear that they aren't getting along, or is this something that has escalated and it's becoming, there's more yelling, or it's become physical? Because, you know, depending on which one of those it is will shape how you respond in that moment. And we'd say this is true for our toddlers all the way through our teenagers, right? Like, we want to really assess how high of a level is this conflict right now. And as much as possible, we want to enter in at an appropriate level with a calming presence. So when I say calming presence, what I mean is really being aware of our body language. So we want to communicate that we are there. So sometimes this means moving closer to the situation. So earlier I talked about how my 4.5 and 7-year-old are used to, at this point, they're able to play in our den quietly for about an hour, but that doesn't mean that there's not conflict. So if we start to hear from downstairs that there's some conflict happening, that usually means that myself or my husband are headed up the stairs to try to learn kind of what's unfolding there. So we want to communicate with our body that we are there, we are calm, and we are going to guide them through what's happening. We want to be aware of our tone of voice. Oftentimes when we want to lead in this calming presence, that involves being really aware of our tone. Is it anxious? Is it getting high? Or is it getting kind of scary or harsh sounding? And ideally, we want it to be firm but warm. And we want it to communicate that we mean business. So if it seems like there's something that's happening that needs to be shut down, that's like, obviously, if there's something happening that's physical and there's like a physical altercation, it probably means stepping in pretty quickly and separating. And you're going to do that with your body, right? You're going to move in and say, whoa, 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 this is not okay. This needs to stop. And we have to be careful because sometimes if we as parents are triggered in those moments, we might be moved to yell or we might be moved to freezing. And as much as possible, we want to seek to be bring that chaos or bring the calm to the chaos, not chaos to the chaos. So it's likely using simple statements like, this isn't working, this needs to stop. And in these moments, we do want to be careful not to shame our kids, but we want to be firm and provide some firm redirection. And then once that's happening, we really want to think through what does it look like to stay neutral in these moments? It is so easy as a parent to be pulled into the role of judge or jury and decide who is to blame and who did what wrong. But especially when there's multiple children involved, we really want to figure out how can I be the guide for my kids through this. And so how we can do that is, first of all, we want to start with what's the emotional response happening here? Are they frustrated? Are they mad? Was someone scared? And try to tune into what was happening there. Because what we know is that if you think about emotion, the word emotion actually has the word motion in it. And it's usually out of our feelings that we move and that we behave and that we act. And so by tuning into those feelings is how we can really help to regulate and to calm our kids. So it might be saying something like, wow, buddy, I can tell that you were really frustrated. You were so frustrated, you took that out of your sister's hand. And then in the same breath, as you continue to go, and wow, hun, I can tell that you were really frustrated and mad that he just took that out of your hand. And in that moment, they're both feeling seen and heard and felt by you. Obviously, you're going to modify those statements depending on the age of your kids, depending on the language that you already use, but that's the idea, right? Like, you don't have to cut and paste my words, use your words, but the idea of simple, brief, naming what's happening in front of you. And in this, what we're doing is we are acknowledging kind of where they're at, and that in of itself will help them to have words for it and can help them to soothe. And we're communicating that I see you, I understand you, and that behavior is still not okay. But we're starting first with how can we name what's happening, and that will bring soothing and calm. And honestly, this will help them feel connected to you and understood by you, and will make it more likely for them to follow you into what you have them do next, which is going to be redirecting the behavior. Because while it's good and right to acknowledge the emotions that they're feeling and how they got there, it's also good and right to say, even with those feelings, we're going to learn how to manage that in a different way. So moving on, based off of kind of like where your kids are at right then, as you are taking the pulse of the emotional intensity and naming where they're at, you got to kind of make the call as the parent and as the guide. Is this a time where they're regulated enough to be able to do a redo and say, hey, brother, you wanted your sister's toy. Can you go ahead and give it back to her and ask her for a turn? That might be possible if things haven't escalated too much. If they have escalated more, it might be you saying, okay, I can tell that we're having a really hard time sharing this toy right now. I'm going to help with that, and we're going to do this instead. And you'll guide them through. In these moments, especially as you get more and more used to using these types of skills, you might be really aware as you're taking the emotional temperature that what's happening or unfolding between your kids has nothing to do with what actually just happened, right? You could tell that, oh, my kid is so frustrated because he was supposed to have a play date this morning, because we always have a play date on at this time and this day, and it's canceled. And so we might say something like, hey, buddy, I know that you are frustrated and you are having a hard day, and I want to be with you in that, but it can't come out on your sister. So we're going to let your sister stay here and play, and you and I are going to go spend some time together, and I'm going to help you walk through this. So it's communicating, how your frustration is coming out right now is not okay, but I can see you and I want to walk with you and guide you through that. And so in that moment, you're, as you've taken the emotional pulse and you kind of created a, this is the next step plan, what we want to keep in mind is we really want to communicate that we want the relationship to continue and that they don't have to go figure this out on their own. It can be so easy, especially depending on how we were responded to in the midst of our behavior and emotions, to feel like I need them to go figure this out and get themselves together. And as much as possible, we want to communicate, come here, like, let's work this out together. And it doesn't mean that they won't ever need space, but when we think about the words that we use and the overall messages that we're sending, we really do want it to be a message of, we're going to get through this together. So that feels like a brief overview of what to do in the moment. And again, I want to summarize. You want to think about checking in with yourself. Where are you at? Are you regulated enough as you're entering the situation? You want to think about physically communicating that you are there and you're going to guide them through it. You want to attune to their emotion, and then you want to help them come up with a plan to be successful. If at all possible, we love to do redos because we know that that can help our kids learn how to get it right the next time. But I think it's also so important for us to notice and know and remember, especially in these moments where emotions are high, is that when our emotions are high, we're not always able to do what we know, right? Oftentimes we know better than we're able to do when our emotions are high. And this is true for us as adults, but especially true for our kiddos. And so I think remembering that helps us to just respond in a way that is more appropriate to be able to meet our kids where they're at. So those are all the things I've been talking about. It's like kind of what you do in the moment of that conflict. As far as, I just want to give a few other pointers for what you can do proactively to manage siblings and sibling conflict. And so some of the things we can do is honestly a lot of what Jill has talked about tonight, is making sure that we are thinking about regulation and how to live regulated lives, because we know that oftentimes when we are dysregulated is when we're more likely to have bigger feelings that are harder to manage. And when our behavior will start to come more from a place of being dysregulated. We really want to think through having appropriate boundaries and structure. So a lot of the times our younger kids really need supervision and they need us to be closer. And they can't necessarily play unattended without having some adult ears nearby to help navigate that conflict that they go through. It's a great time to use structure and routine, like Jill talked about. I thought about a few instances lately that I thought I would share. One of which is one of our sweet neighbors had this old set of silverware. This is Disney silverware. There was one fork and one spoon that they shared with us. There was like a Mickey Mouse fork and a Goofy spoon or something. And sure enough, every morning at breakfast, we started to notice a pattern that my boys both wanted the special spoon for their cereal. And it was just regularly becoming an area of tension and conflict at our house. And so what we did was I pulled out a Post-it note and we wrote down the days of the week and wrote down who got to use the spoon on what day. And we put it up on the refrigerator, and it was kind of magical. Like all of a sudden, like it was no longer a conflict between them. It was no longer a conflict between them and me or my husband. It was now we had a plan and they could understand the plan. And that really helped us get through that hiccup of the day. Another one that we've been using with our oldest right now is how we manage screen time and kind of how to help there be structure and limits and boundaries there. And so we found that it really helped reduce some of the conflict that we as parents were experiencing with him by just saying, like, this is how much screen time you get. And we made a little note card that has a box for a certain amount of minutes, and he gets a certain amount of boxes every week. And when he uses one, he gets to check it off. And it's just taking this bit of conflict between us, a boundary and something that was tense, and turning it into something that he can see and understand. So that has helped a lot at our house. Other things is we're thinking about being proactive in conflict, and how to navigate those times between siblings is one thing you can do is really focus on how can you strengthen the relationships between your kids. So some of the ways that you can do this is just help them to like each other and to notice what they have in common. A huge way that we feel connected to people is by noticing what we have in common, right? If we think about it as adults, so often we connect over reading the same books or liking the same music or having a shared experience. So if we can facilitate that with our kids, like, oh my gosh, look, you guys both really love to play this game, or you both like this color, or things like that in the age appropriate way, that actually can help them feel bonded to one another. Other ways that we can do that is facilitate them working on a project together, or with you, depending on how much oversight or conflict they're experiencing, as well as just creating that playful environment where they can have shared joy. And a lot of that can help smooth over the edges when there's conflict, is just having a stronger relationship there. And then lastly, when we think about conflict, the last thing I would say is to replay the tape. If you've come to grow, you've probably heard me talk about this, but I think something that is huge that we get to do as parents is to learn from our life. And I'd encourage you on good days, but also on hard days, to kind of think through what went well today, what didn't go well today. And in this instance, like, man, what good happened in that moment of conflict, and if it went well, or maybe like, oh, how did we get there? And just replay and learn, like, oh yeah, I was really dysregulated for this reason, or looking back, that might have been more than my kids could handle, or just kind of notice your life and learn from it. And that can help us to make plans as we move forward as parents. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any more questions about that, please feel free to put them below, or reach out to us at parentpause@thejourney.org, especially if there's a specific instance that you'd like to share where we can be more specific in our answer. We would love to jump into that with you. So I think that's what I have for that.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that might be all for tonight in terms of Q&A. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, parents, we are so glad that you're here with us tonight, that you paused, that you found space in your day to exhale and to lean in and learn with us. It's just a privilege to get to do this with you. As we close out our night, I do just want to remind you that you're welcome to send questions or feedback our way at that email address, which again is parentpause@thejourney.org. And as we end our night, I'm just going to read a blessing over us. So let's take a deep breath, and I'll read that over us, and we'll say goodnight. Okay. Lord, as we end our evening, we thank you. We thank you for this place and this pause and this space to be. We thank you that you see us and you know us and that you hold all things. We trust that you know our joys, our concerns, and our curiosities about our children. God, we trust that you know our grief and our children's grief, and that you care. Help us to know your presence and to learn your voice. Help us to take from this evening what you've had for us, and to leave everything else behind. Lord, gather us to be with you as you are with us. And as we go, Father, help us to know your delight. Amen. All right, you guys, we hope you sleep well tonight and that you find a way to restore your body and your soul and your brain this evening. And we hope we get you a good night's rest. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Hi. Thanks, guys.